So folks, I want to this morning talk a little bit about the concept of integrity. What does it mean to live a life of integrity? What does our tradition teach about integrity? And I can't help but contrast two stories of two individuals that we have been reading and hearing a lot about. So one is a political leader who, by his own admission, has made up things about his own life, his own background, his own circumstances. The other is an athlete who thankfully is recovering from a horrible health mishap, circumstance on the field, and who is known by everyone as somebody who has always been decent, has always had a sense of who he is and of his own integrity. Clearly, their paths don't cross, but it was interesting for me to note these two individuals, these two stories that are so different from each other, but that point to the whole question of integrity. What does it mean for us as individuals to live our lives with a sense of integrity? I'm not going to speak of politics. I'm not going to speak of sports. I am going to look at someone in the Torah who I think teaches us how to live a life of integrity even when your life is complicated, even when you evolve, even when you have ambivalence about things, including your own identity. You can still have an overall arc of integrity in your life. Now, the football player, as a young man, was known to be someone who cared about his community, knew that he wanted to play football, was anxious to try to help, had a certain even keel, as his high school coach was speaking about, a real trajectory that seems to have been pretty steady from his youth on. That's not true of all of us. First of all, he's in his 20s. Most of us, as we progress through life, we have complex relations with our loved ones. We may change careers. We may even change paths in terms of how we understand ourselves. And so, in order to help us to look more carefully at ourselves, in order to help us to understand what it means to have a life that has integrity, even if things change, even if things are complicated, I want to look at Joseph. We have been spending weeks reading about the life of Joseph. He's known by the rabbis as Yosef HaTzadik, Joseph the Righteous. We know that as a teenager, he didn't exactly help his brothers to achieve a lovable attitude towards him. He, in fact, encouraged their resentments as the favored son of Jacob, the father. He goes down to Egypt. He rises up. He gets knocked down. He rises up again. There is actually interesting complexity around his identity. He dresses like an Egyptian. He probably walked like an Egyptian. He probably started to think of himself as an Egyptian because he was surrounded by, and in many respects embraced, that culture. He had a very complicated relationship with his family. And yet, throughout, I would argue, he maintains a certain integrity. He maintains a certain stability. At his core, he never really changes. When he has the opportunity, when the wife of Potiphar tries to seduce him, he refuses because he understands who he is. He understands what is right and what is not right. And ultimately, he will reunite with his brothers, and he will say, when he finally reveals himself to them, Anochi Yosef Achichem, I am Joseph, your brother. Even though there is anger and resentment, even though arguably he's trying to get back at them at certain moments in the story, he has never forgotten that he is their brother. That has remained core throughout his life. If you'll recall, when he was a teenager, he was looking for them. He said, Et achai anochi mevakesh. I am looking for my brothers. He was always looking for them. And so that remained his core, along with the changes in his life, along with the aspects of his identity that were complicated and at times even tortured. There is a basic decency. There is a basic sense of who he is, a basic honest way of relating to his family, to his people, and to the world. So I want to say to each of us, we're complicated people. We each contain multitudes, as Walt Whitman said. And we may very well evolve from one professional space to another. We may have times in our lives where there are close people in our family that relate to beautifully, and times when there is tension. We may present differently in some situations than in other situations. The sociologist Irving Goffman spoke about a butler to give an example of how, when he was speaking to the people he supervised, he conducted himself in a different way than when he was speaking to the people whom he served. That is part of being human. That's called modulation. But if there isn't an actual core, if he was a horror to the people he supervised and kissing up ridiculously to the people that he served, that would be a bridge too far. So we need to each look at our lives and challenge ourselves to say, is the core sufficiently there? Do we have an integrity in terms of the honesty and the responsibility with which we face ourselves and face other people? If we don't, if we're just floating here and there, if we are completely this today and completely that the next day, then we're in serious trouble. And people who are like that, first of all, there's a certain sadness to people who don't have a real core sense of who they are, notwithstanding the complexities of life and of identity. Not only is it sad, it's scary. People who don't have a core sense of integrity, there's something frightening about such people and how they relate to other people. So I want to say to each of us, it takes effort to live a life of integrity. It is okay to have ambiguity and ambivalence. It is okay to evolve. But let's ask ourselves, is there a core? Do I know who I am fundamentally? Do I understand my relationships to the people in my life fundamentally? Am I able, whether it's at work or at a party or at a family gathering, to say, hey, this is too far. What I'm being asked to do right now, what I'm listening to, what I'm being invited to join is so different from what I know to be right, from who I know myself to be, that I need to take a step back now. I cannot participate because that would violate my sense of integrity. Now, I want to conclude by pointing to a passage that we'll be reading shortly. So we're going to turn our attention to Moses and Aaron and Miriam and the children of Israel who will be enslaved in Egypt for generations. God says to Moses, go tell Pharaoh to let the people go. And Moses says to God, who are you? When Pharaoh asks, who sent me? What name shall I give? And God says, Eheyeh Asher Eheyeh, I am who I am. You tell Pharaoh, that's who sent you. I am who I am. Now, God is God, okay? God is in a fundamentally unique category, but human beings can use that as an inspiration, as an example. Yes, life changes. Yes, there are things we're unsure about. Yes, there are aspects of ourselves that may evolve, but can we each say, each day, when we wake up and face our loved ones and face the world, Eheyeh Asher Eheyeh, I am who I am, I certainly hope so. Shabbat Shalom.